IVM.
Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. I'm your host Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and this is a super duper blockbuster special. Really wanted to have this guest on my show for a long time. I'm very, very excited at the product they're building on, and I'm sure that you will find it interesting too. My guest is Shinjini Kumar, co-founder Salt, which is building financial products for women. Has like just 4 words, but believe me, there's much more to it. As their website, okay, check their website out, folks. Salt.one says salt is essential, familiar, capital, precious, primal, and ubiquitous, just like women and money. I'm sold already. I'm a man still. We're going to talk about her. We're going to talk about salt. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, folks, right after this really short break.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into a show about crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
And welcome back, everyone. And of course, Shinjini, welcome. Thank you so much. Welcome to Paisa Vaisa, and thanks for doing this for our listeners.
Hi, Anupam. Thanks for inviting me over.
It is totally my honor. I'm thrilled to have you. I mean, come on here. It's not often that I get to talk to a woman, obviously, banker, regulator, fintech startup founder, all in one. And you're a veteran, good Lord. You've seen so much. How has life been for you? I mean, last 5-10 years, how has it been?
Sometimes when I really bother young people in my team a lot, they are, how do you have so much energy? And I tell them it's because I'm sort of living my life in the reverse. So when I was 22, I got into the Reserve Bank of India, and it was, I've talked about that story many times, but essentially the story was that I'm a Bihari girl and I was growing up in Bihar and everybody has to write some exam. And I was very averse to that, but I still wrote the RBI exam because I was told that if I pass, I'll only live in a city. And my only dream was to get out of Bihar and live in a city. So at 22, I was, I qualified RBI. I had already found my sort of dream before that, which was to be a journalist. So I was in Delhi. I was doing a program in journalism at Time Center for Media Studies, and I get this letter from RBI saying, you're being sent to Bangalore if you join. And the city excited me more than anything else, the idea of going to another city. And I sought some advice from my editor. We didn't have a phone at home, so I ended up taking the train to Bangalore, first Chennai and then Bangalore, because RBI used to have a staff college at Chennai. So essentially, once I got into RBI, it was a very serious job. So you had to always be, on point. You had to be careful about how you look, how you dress, how you talk, who you meet, everything. And why it was a huge learning opportunity for me, because that's the nature of the role. Also, because I was handling FDI in India in the 90s, so 94 to 98 was a very exciting time. Economy was opening up. A lot of, FERA was being broken down. So I had a lot of fun doing that. But having said that, there was a time, and we'll talk about it as we go along. I don't want to make a whole essay out of it. But essentially, that's how it started. And from then onwards, since I got into private sector, I got the opportunity to do different things, exciting things at different stages of my time. Sometimes I sought them, sometimes they sought me. But all in all, it's been a very exciting journey for me. And so that keeps me always, every time I say I never change my job, I always change my career. And every time I change my career, it kind of takes me back 10 years in my attitude, because if I don't, then I'll never make anything of it. So right now, I'm like, going on 35.
Look at the pivots out there. I'm sure your journey has just begun. And 94, 98, right? So what was that, Rangarajan as the governor?
94, 98, partly it was Dr. Rangarajan, partly it was Bimal Jalan. Yeah.
Wow, what an era. Chalo, theek hai. Let's come in the present day. Yeah, I like this entire mystery you've built around Salt, right? I'm following it on Instagram. I've seen a few tweets on it. So you're building your product out. I saw your blog. Loved the Salt Stories section. My God. I mean, folks, just go there and read some of the stories. I want to start there. women, money, stories. Okay, let's unpack this for our listeners. What is Salt about? Okay, and what is it addressing?
So great place to start with, Anupam. Also because that's exactly where we started. So my personal journey with Salt actually started a little bit after Chaitra had already started this journey. Chaitra is my co-founder, Chaitra Chidanan. She was the co-founder of Simple, which is a buy now, pay later, which was, I think, India's first buy now, pay later. And when I was in PwC, I'd helped them to set up the company and, the whole regulatory wiring that you require for a product like that. So she and I have been friends and we've been in touch. And she came and said she wanted to do something in the space of women and money because she had realized that just because financial services had moved to fintech and technology was now more ubiquitous and therefore should be more accessible, but the numbers did not indicate that. So the number of women who were still buying financial products, including her product, was not, going up as a percentage of the total population. And so she wanted to do something in that space. And initially, I was only trying to brainstorm with her and help her to think through this clearly, maybe find a co-founder and all of that stuff. Even then, I think what Chaitra had started doing was she was talking to a lot of women to try and understand as a user, because she's a product person and she approaches things very differently from how I would. So when I started to talk to her, I started to look for data and I started to look for studies because I come from an academic background. You can see all these books. I live with a professor. My husband's a professor, and so
at least your books are real. My background is phony, but what a library! What a library!
How is it? Yeah. So we have so we always start from that point, right? So I wanted to go back, read up, get census data, do this, that, and the other. And one realization that very quickly hit me was how little data there was, and there really wasn't much in the space of money and women beyond the microfinance stories, which are great stories. And also, if you have seen, microfinance industry as a whole has been very good at documenting individual stories of women and families and communities, right? And so that's all that we could find. And on the other hand, we wanted to start not from the microfinance population, but from the young millennial women, for the simple reason that we felt like they were ready for change. So while their mothers and grandmothers had, even if they had been working, even if they had been earning their own money, even if they had held senior positions, they were fairly happy to delegate the management of the family money to the man of the house and take charge of other things, which was kind of anecdotal, right? Because between Chaitra and me, we have one generation gap. And then the third co-founder, Aditi, we have another 10 years gap. So between the three of us, we had enough stories of our own to meld, right? But then it became important for us to do what is a little bit of ethnography to actually go in and understand. Now, the interesting thing that happened, Anupam, there is that Chaitra was doing these conversations because I was still at City and I really wasn't making time for that. Aditi was still at Niyam. But when Chaitra did these conversations with women, a very interesting thing happened. She was doing it to get research and insights for herself. But inevitably, the woman that she would speak to she would schedule 20 minutes, and these conversations will go on for 40 minutes, 60 minutes, sometimes an hour and a half.
Wow.
And these women would end up saying many times, that most of the time, that it was the first time that they had talked about money in that level of detail, and trying to sort of not listening, not being told what to do, but actually asking questions and talking about their own journey or relationship or insights or whatever. And they would inevitably say, will you talk to my friend? And so it became a very important and interesting point for us, because most of these interviews and Salt stories that we did or we are still doing are coming from referrals. So you talk to one person and that person gets you to talk to more people, etc., and that's how it all started. And then initially, once we made the company in February, by around March or April, our website was ready. And as you know, our website is very, very, we are very lucky to have the design team that we have. We're very lucky to have the content team that we have. Yeah. And so they started to, so we were having these conversations, sometimes individually, sometimes in groups. And then we wanted to start documenting them. So one is, of course, as a startup, you will document all of this stuff as like a product person. But what I also felt was important was to share these stories back with the people so that more women would, read them, share them, and find them relatable. Because one of the things that does not happen enough in financial system is we don't create enough relatability for a diverse set of population. The financial services works well for you, for me, for a certain type of person with a certain type of money understanding and attitude, but then not everybody can relate to it, which is one of the reasons that so much exclusion exists across financial strata. So it's not that only the poor are excluded. People are excluded on the basis of their lifestyles, on the basis of their or gender, or asset ownership, on the type of jobs they have, on the type of shops they have. So there are many layers of exclusion, and we thought we decided to start with women for a reason, and I'll not get into that right now. But we always want to be very cognizant of the fact that gender is not the only exclusion that exists in financial system. But yes, that's the thing that we picked up to solve.
I mean, you talk about exclusion. My mom's a banker, so she's been working with us. We have the longest time. She retired, of course, long time ago, and she can easily do a digital payment. If it's one of those payment apps. But ask her to do an NEFT, and she comes to me. And I was like, I know what you're talking. Anyways, let's just go back. This question, which I wanted to ask, and it's a pretty obvious one. What are the most common myths around women and money? What have you faced, or what have you seen, stuff that probably surprises you or doesn't surprise you?
So, it's a very good question again. And I started to face this as soon as I decided to, do this. So obviously, a lot of my friends are bankers or financial services people, senior people. Many of them are men in 50s. And the first thing that everybody would say when I would say we are building a platform for women to buy financial products, because that is how we defined it. We didn't want to educate. We didn't want to, talk down to people, because we very strongly believe that women have an intuitive relationship with money, which is fairly healthy and psychologically wholesome. And we don't want to destroy that by making them feel like they don't know enough. And therefore, the idea was to build an action-driven platform. But the moment I would say that, two things would happen. Half of them would veer around to going technical and saying, yeah, but how will you sell to them? Women tend to be risk averse, meaning thereby that they don't buy, and therefore you will not have a business model. So that's one. The other response that frequently came was also that, why women? You have worked in financial services. There is enough exclusion that exists. Formal financial system still serves a small number of people. So why only women? Why not everybody? So there are other categories of exclusion. And so I'll just talk about the first one a little bit, because that myth is a self-perpetuating myth. And the reason I say this is because most people, so one of the things that happened to me because I studied English literature is that there's a deep background in also feminism, right? Because you kind of academically studied it and understood gender and how gender discrimination really works. Gender discrimination is not so obvious that, somebody sits down and says that I don't want women here. I mean, that used to happen. It still happens, but that's not a very major form of discrimination that we are dealing with right now. What we are dealing with is far more nuanced and far more, because what happens is that there are societal attitudes towards gender that are formed in very solid ways, but in very quiet ways also. When your girl goes out for and gets harassed, for example, the blame is always on her, right? And she's the one who has to change her mode of transport, her route of going. And all of it is done with very good heart. So, fathers or brothers or husbands do this with a very good heart. But the fact of the matter is that it tends to, like when I was studying in Austin, my batchmates used to call me Cinderella because Austin was a safe city. We used to live in a very safe part of the town because we were students. And yet whenever I would go out, I would leave a party at 12. I don't know what it was, but there was this, and nobody was telling me that. There was this psychological barrier because I had grown up in Bihar. There was something about, staying out beyond that time, which would take the enjoyment of the party from me. And so I would just kind of wrap up and leave. And that's not something which anybody was telling. I was I'm a self-made woman. I earn my own money. My husband is not the kind of person who has anything to say about what I do, where I go. But it was very much there. And therefore, when women form these attitudes of saying, I've spoken to women that are CEOs and, C-suite women, because most of my friends who are women are in that position. And yet it's not that their husbands are telling them that you don't manage your money and I will do it. No, that's not how it works. But it's just that their prioritization in life is always to say, Oh, so if I have, so like a friend of mine in one of the biggest tech companies in the world, she very senior position, she said this. She said, as we came along, there was always that fight for time, and so you had to allocate your time to things that were very important. And job, of course, was very important. And then there was children, and then there was home. And if the man was already, if the guy was already taking care of the money, why would I solve for it that I didn't need to solve for? And that, I think, so what happens then is, despite the fact that between my grandmother and my mother and me and my niece, there are very different lifestyle preferences or attitudes or relationship drivers that are far more feministically inclined compared to previous generations. Like my grandfather would have something to say about my grandmother having money, but my husband would have nothing to say that, right? So while all of that has changed, this very idea of saying that this is not my priority hasn't changed as much. So I think then what happens is that the data that you use as a financial system provider, because I've been on the supply side, is always data that is in which this bias is already coded. And that makes you think that, oh, women are not buying, or women are only spending on lifestyle products and not on financial products. And that perpetuates this bias on the sales side. So the sales side never makes any effort, assuming that this is not a population that's worth trying for. Now, as I said, the things have changed dramatically, but the supply side continues to perpetuate that. Same thing on credit. Credit is very obvious. So a lot of people talk about credit. There are a lot more studies on credit. And therefore, I think all of us understand that very well, that because women don't borrow, their volume, their track record, the credit models, the data input does not get created. And that creates the further impression that they are not, good borrowers. When microfinance industry challenged that challenge became very, very, it became very successful. It was a very successful gamble, because the industry just created it afresh, and you realize that women were very good borrowers. So now across the board, everybody recognizes that repayment willingness is higher in women, and therefore you can lend, but still you struggle, because bringing that myth of the women not being the prime consumer versus, making it happen. So it's a little bit of an extra effort. So I think the biggest myth was that. The two very quick myths I'll tell you, which also we faced, which was more around the time when we started talking to potential, investors or people that were really interested in knowing what we were doing, and all very good intention, very well people that actually wanted to help and support. But still they found it hard to get past this, which is to say, two things. One is that if they don't want to do it, like my IBM friend that I said that, who said, I want to take care of my children when I have a spare time rather than sit with my relationship manager and figure out money. If they don't want to do it, how will you ever make them do it? And therefore, there's no business here. But the second one was the one that I want to challenge. The first one, I don't think we can challenge, because, when people get defensive, changing habits is very hard. And as humans, I think we tend to prioritize what we want over what we need. So even if you need financial independence, you'll not prioritize it, because what you want is to, go to the kitchen and turn out a great, dish. So that's not something that we will probably be able to change. But the other one is very interesting, where they say that if they actually want to do it, they can use the products that already exist. So if you can use it, why can't they use it? Why do you need to build something? That's the one that we really need to challenge. Not just we. I think everybody needs to challenge that, because that gap is very visible, that, existing products don't fulfill that need. They do perpetuate the same stereotype. They will build for people who are far more profitable. Obviously, businesses seek profits, right? So why will they go and unlock something which requires extra effort? So that's the one that we figured, and we did find people that understood that and that were willing to help and that were willing to understand that and put their money where their mouth is. But yeah, that's
Sure.
those are the three things that I would say we encountered.
My next question is a very simple follow-up of what you just said, right? Let's go deep there. Let's talk about this range of financial products that are out there that are, any glaring gaps, anything that you think is or is not suited for women. I keep on hearing, home loan is good for man, home loan is good for women. There's tons of bullshit out there. You tell me how this works.
So Anupam, if you pick any product, you will realize that the product is probably suited for a very small part of the population per se, because financial services has been one of the industries that has really not innovated a lot. And now I'm not talking about, let's first talk about the conventional financial services, because fintech innovation has been huge, but a lot of that has been around payments, which is a new product, and therefore new product, new type of capital, new type of players, new type of clients. So that's been a fantastic story. But let's first talk about the financial system and the products that already exist, which are pure play finance products, where there is a pricing power that continues to be with the supplier and not with the buyer. So the buyer hardly ever can, because there's a selectivity involved. Even if you apply, even if you say that I can go on a platform like Bank Bazaar and apply for a loan, and everybody will call me and everybody will ask me to give me a loan. The fact of the matter is that if you apply to 8, it depends on who you are. If I don't know, if I apply now, then maybe out of 8, only one person will want to give me because I'm a startup founder. But if I had applied when I was working at Citi, then out of 8, all 8 would have wanted to give it to me, right? But they would not have wanted to give it. Maybe today, only one out of them will want to give it to me. And that's because the financial system has built itself and constantly perpetuated that belief that people with salaries, people with regular incomes, people with that runway to grow in life financially are the people that can repay loans, right? And it was not at all a bad idea where it started, because finance starts with this large number of working population, white collar workers, and people did have 30-year careers where their incomes grew, where they got bonuses, where they got annual payouts, and the entire financial system built itself around that cash flow of the individual household. And so nothing. It's not that anything is wrong there. What is happening is that world has come crashing down. That world has changed dramatically. Very young people can make a lot of money and after that decide to maybe go bust because they decide to do a new enterprise, and that enterprise is not as successful. So you can't really use those models. And whether it is in wealth, whether it is in lending, whether it is in insurance, everywhere you realize that the actual lifestyles that people have versus the way those products have been designed, there is a big lag. It's not that the industry is not trying. The industry is trying. The industry tries to make tweaks, but they're not able to. They can make tweaks. They're not able to make jumps, and that's because of technology, partly because everybody is stuck with old technology, so it sort of takes time, but also because of regulation. A lot of time just trying that new thing and making that hoop. So, for example, a lot of banks tried to give money to small entrepreneurs, right? So, as long as I've lived in India and been part of this financial system, I have seen products for SMEs and always that massive, trillions of dollars of market and how that will boost and how it will add to the GDP. All of us know that story. All of us have seen those PowerPoints hundreds of times. Yeah. But in reality, when you go down to doing that, the reason it doesn't work is because you then are pulled back by that same logic of the credit risk model, that same logic of having pre-existing history and scores, and therefore it's different. And now, of course, credit is being disrupted. As I said, payment got disrupted because it was new, it was easy. Now, a lot of it in small consumer credit space is happening, and it will definitely happen everywhere. So in some sense, we feel like we are part of that tide, which will continue to look for these changes. But what I want to tell you is at Salt, at least, we realize that we are a little bit away from changing product because, making product requires a lot of licensing and regulatory stuff. But we also feel that there is a huge opportunity to solve for solutioning, to solve for the trust in the sales process. Like insurance is a classic example. I mean, you know this, right? So how hard it is to kind of, find the right tone of the sale and make sure that it's not being sold, but it's being bought. And that's like really, really hard. It's a small thing, but it's very hard. And that applies across products. So I think that to start with, we are trying to solve for that problem because we have a new user group. Many of them will be first-time buyers, and that trust, that ability to understand that they are being told what is good for them and not what is good for the seller is an important place to start. So that's where I think we'll start.
Before I go into this, our break, Shinjini, I want to talk about some anecdotes and some kind of stories out there. One of my favorites, and probably listeners of this podcast have listened to this because it continues. It always blows my mind whenever I think about it. But it happened back then. Recently had an episode with Gayatri Vasudeva of Labor Net where we were talking about informal labor, and I said this anecdote then also. So 8th November 2016. Okay, we all know what happened. We all know what happened that day. One anecdote that sticks with me from that era is a lot of women that I know, or at least, extended circles, blah, blah, they were having a terrible time. And when I kind of found out more, here's what turned out. It seems that when they used to ask their husbands for money to run the house, their husbands would give them whatever, X, 100, 200, 300, whatever the number is. And they would then squirrel away a small amount of that for themselves. You know why? Because whenever that, say they wanted to splurge, okay, maybe they wanted to buy something or maybe they wanted to go somewhere, the husbands didn't approve of that. And they would say, why, uspe kyun kharcha kar rahe ho? Why are you spending on that? So to avoid that, that whatever judgment call or whatever you want to call it, they squirrel this away. And they had years of money. Overnight, it's gone. So that's my story number one. Story number two, which for people who listen to Paisa Vaisa through the years, you'd recall this episode I'd done with Hansi Mehrotra for financial planning for women. But how women who say come to Bombay, safe for women, etc., to work obviously, and they have to find a house in a safe area. Right now, that's something that men don't have to do. You can stay pretty much anywhere. Safe area rents are higher than quote unquote unsafe area rents. How about that? An increase in your expenditure just because I wouldn't say your gender. It's a city is supposed to be safe for everybody, right? That's my story number two. And question number three, actually, not story, is once I'd asked on Twitter, that why I don't want to use the word housewife, but just stick with me out here, homemaker, call it what you want. Don't have insurance for them, right? And I won't say that I got cancelled, but people kind of corrected me and said, hey, excuse me, insurance is replacement of income. And if the homemaker is not making any income, then why does she need insurance? And I was like, okay, in that very limited sense of the discussion, you're absolutely right. Here, for what I was thinking is the home exists because of the homemaker. I mean, I don't want to go into what would happen if she's gone. But, do you have any stories, any thoughts on what I've just said?
What you just said reminded me of that famous story about how Stanford got built because, this guy went to Harvard and said,
the donation.
And then you get turned away. And then you start something. In many ways, I think we have to look at finance like that. The fundamental problem that arises, there are two issues here. One major issue is that the income of women who work at home is considered inferior to the income of anybody else that works in any other place. That is very core to this. And that's why when lawyers or others start to talk of human rights activists and others, feminists begin to talk about home income being remunerated, home work being remunerated, there is a big point there. And you don't want to make it into a rights or a movement because there's just too much, and maybe you do. But what simple thing to understand is that the color of money is, it's money, right? The second problem is that cash is hugely discriminated against in modern financial world, which goes against people that have cash. Who has cash? The first story that you talked about. Women have cash. When we started doing salt stories and talking to different types of women, we were including everyone. Women that work at home, women that work in small businesses, women that do, content creation and a lot of these type of jobs, and of regular salaried women. One very interesting thing we found in our group discussions was that women who stay at home or work at home don't all define themselves in the exact same way. They think of themselves in three ways primarily. There are women that will tell you, I'm a proud housewife, or they'll use some word like, it's like the proud Indian, the proud housewife. They are basically, what they're trying to tell you is that I'm a person who works at home. I know what I'm doing. I take care of my life in a certain way, and I don't need change, but this is who I am. They also have access to money. They are probably the ones that you're talking about, squirreling away the money and, doing things with it. They are spenders. The cosmetics industry, the jewelry industry, the chit fund industry, there are various industries, the handbag industry, the shoes industry, depending on which income group you're talking about, values that customer. They actually value that customer. But the financial services industry does not value that customer because she has cash rather than a bank account or whatever you're talking about. The second type of woman is somebody who will say, I'm a housewife, but there'll be a sadness about it. Like she is struggling to figure out, because she probably is very well educated. She didn't think about being a housewife and now she's a housewife. And so she'll say, I'm just a housewife. And so their need for understanding finance and doing things is slightly different from the other category. And then there is one which we found very interesting, which is I'm at home. And these are women that will inevitably, after a few years, come out of it and start doing something else. So it's because they're anyway women that were either working or are qualified and they've taken a break. So they very clearly define themselves as being on a break. Now that break can be 6 months, that break can be 10 years, but they, in their psychological relationship with the world and with the with money, they are thinking of themselves as being on a break. Now, if you think about financial needs for them, they will vary between not just the three groups that we talked about, which is salaried, entrepreneur, and homemaker, which is how financial system conventionally looks at it, but within that there will be all these subclassifications. So one of the purposes that Salt Stories served for us was to surface a lot of these different types of stories, right? Because they all relate to money differently, they think about money differently. And also, if you saw the money personality test that we created, right, one of the first things that we went live with, this was the whole idea. The idea was that you don't have to feel bad, you don't have to conform to a stereotype, you don't have to feel bad about what you do, but you should know, because if you know, that's your first step to moving ahead and taking charge of money. So I think there is that, all your anecdotes, all the stories that you talked about go back to the same problem, which is my money is not as good as somebody else's money because my money is in cash. So it's not just the women, it's workers, like, daily wage workers, the small shopkeepers who earn cash. Somehow their money is not as good because they cannot leverage that money. They cannot create that same record of that money. And the way the industry is trying to solve this problem currently, because that's what they can do, that's what is in their hand, is by taking that money and digitizing it. So you hear a lot about UPI and rails on top of UPI, and you hear a lot about the digitization and how it will benefit the whole ecosystem for lending, database lending, etc. But in my view, there is something more fundamental than that which is required, which is to not discriminate against cash in the manner in which we are currently doing. I mean, there's this somehow it seems to have become like a movement. People talk about revolution of digitizing money, but the important thing is financial well-being of people. The digitization of money is not the goal in itself. And therefore, a lot of women that we spoke to actually asked us this question, that I save 2,000 rupees a month, and I would like to put that money into a SIP without having to go through this whole bank account thing, because that my husband controls. Not every marriage has the same dynamic. Why should that woman not have the opportunity to take that? And because now she ends up putting it in a kitty or whatever. If you really want to attract that money, you as the service provider need to think about how to do it. But that's where I was telling you that part of the challenge is technology, but part of the challenge is also this whole regulatory bias that exists against small earners and cash earners.
The cash thing always gets to me. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, there's this missionary zeal. I've seen tweets about, I did, my maid has this, I arranged this digital, that. Like, come on, man. All that is okay. I mean, it's a great cause, it's a great thing, but you don't look down on cash. Cash is convenient.
Yeah.
Cash serves the purpose. Your mobile phone runs out of battery. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You go to someone who doesn't have a UPI code. What are you going to do? And
also, people live different lives, Anupam. I got a young girl to do a study around my village of how easy it is to access cash versus digital, and the stories that she told me of going to a bank and withdrawing money and how hard it is. Even right here in Mumbai, I insist on paying to bank accounts of everybody that works, and I do it for my convenience. I don't do it for their convenience, and sometimes I feel very ashamed because this woman tells me that she needed the money and she had to go and stand in a line for a certain number of hours, and she had to go a little bit far. And so I don't think that unless we make this so ubiquitous, which I think we will, but that bias should not exist. I think that bias works against the people who need it the most. That's the problem.
And I tell you, I can do an entire episode on this, but we've got so much more to talk about. Folks, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You can see I'm really really pumped up about this episode. We'll be right back after this break.
We know you love fast food,
fast fashion,
faster payment,
lightning fast internet speed.
Then why not fast information?
On Think Fast, where we discuss the latest developments in the world of technology, business, marketing, pop culture.
With a side of sarcasm and my dad jokes, not just mine.
Not mine, Varun. My jokes are funny. So join me, guys, the funnier one, Suchita Salvan, co-founder of LBB.
And me, Varun Dugirala, the co-founder of The Glitch, as we think fast only on the IVM network.
Fresh episodes out every Monday.
On the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
And folks, welcome back to this really special episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Shinjini Kumar, co-founder Salt. Okay, Shinjini, now let's talk about specific, they call it use case in startup lingo for women, right? So let's start from financial planning. How is financial planning for women uniquely different, right? Let's say, I don't know, I'm a financial advisor, right? And I'm going to take a woman as a client, whatever. How is financial planning for women uniquely different? I know it is because I know that life events typically tend to have a much deeper impact on women than they have on men. Can we just go through this?
Sure. So, one thing I want to clarify is that while we will talk about women, we have a very firm belief that the lifestyles that women have today will be the lifestyles that young people pretty much uniformly across genders will have after a few years. So solving for women actually helps you to understand what is going to happen to other people. And I'll give you some examples. So if you're talking about wealth or wealth management, the primary thing is that most women do not take their longevity at the same income level for granted today. And that's been the case like for many years, right? So even if the woman goes to the same, so I've worked in a chartered accounting, I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, right, for five and a half years. And we used to have many instances where a boy and a girl would join with the exact same degree. They would be friends, they would have studied together, and they would join exactly at the same time in the firm. Now, what starts to happen after a few years is they'll decide to get married. And while the guy will take it for granted that his career to his path to partner is XYZ and he needs to do XYZ to become that, to see that path to partner. Unfortunately, very few women actually even think like that because there are fewer women partners to look up to. Also, there are much more uncertainties in their lives at that point of time. So for them, life and the planning for life, and they even if they are equally intelligent, they are equally intelligent, they're equally smart. In fact, many times they're smarter. And I've worked very hard many times to just keep them back at the workplace and tell them that, yes, this is your path and this is how you will get there. But it has been very hard because there is always that gap that they see in their lives, right? And they don't know when they're going to fall, when they're going to get into that, right? And therefore, they that taking for granted that from between here and there I will reach, which is how financial products are built, right? The 30-year mortgage, the 20-year mortgage, the longer the term, the better it is. The benefits of compounding, the starting up, with a insurance where you will pay in for a certain number of years. So products. More than products, I don't see that there is so much wrong with the product. The selling has been built according to that. So if, for example, there is really no reason for insurance sales to be the way they are, right? That you pay premium for a certain number of years because, the seller has a certain revenue model that they will perpetuate. A lot of that then stops making sense to the women. And when it stops making sense to the women, it's not like they sit down and somebody sits and analyzes to them and tells them that these are the way out of these problems. You will get to that point if you persist. If the woman who has come to you, you will give her the right advice, she will persist and she'll find the way out. The problem is that most of it's the same as career. Instead of waiting and finding that way out, you just shrink away from it. You just withdraw. You just start to do nothing. And therefore you say, okay, I have a little bit of money and it's lying here, or I'll ask Papa, where can I put it, etc. What is very heartening now to see is that a lot of younger women are being very, they're challenging this a lot more. And they are not prepared to take this for granted that they will not have these careers. Their careers may not be the same aspiration. So I don't think one of the great things that has happened is that nobody today, boys, girls, has an aspiration to work for 30 years and retire. Like I don't know if I've met any young person in the last few years who has that aspiration and who comes back and says, yeah, after 30 years, I want to be the, CEO of Pepsi or something like that. Even if they admire those people, their personal goals and their personal aspirations are much more a combination of, climbing the Kilimanjaro plus doing a few years of work and saving up enough to be able to achieve. So it's a lot of sprint. The life is a lot in sprints now. So I will have a sprint and I will do this, and then I will do this with my money, and then I'll have another sprint and I will do this. And I don't have a very clear idea of how long my sprints are going to be. But maybe, so to answer your question, maybe I need to keep some money that I can spare today for compounding, because I think everybody intuitively understands that compounding is beneficial for me. But then maybe I also need to keep some money that I don't know, maybe I'll, like me, right? I went to Mukteshwar to stay with a friend and I fell in love with a house and I had to buy it. And I said, where is the money? I'm going to sit and buy this I'm not going to leave this place until I buy this house. So I feel like a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Z folks, regardless of gender, will look for financial products and financial advice that will help them to meet these combination of goals, which are much more integrated with their lifestyles and their choices. And these, also you have to understand, right? Like we used to take for granted that the world will keep, and it's a very sad thing to say, but we took it for granted. There was a whole lot of optimism when we started working, right? We always took it for granted that there would be this whole mythology of quarter on quarter growth of everything and listed companies and analysts following that and chasing you and running after it. It somehow looked like there was this unbelievable long-term productivity that was going to continue, right? At least it probably did for our lifetime, but even before that, it's kind of collapsed, right? So I think young people intuitively also understand that with all this environmental damage, with all the, governance failures in corporations, the technology disruption, they also understand that they can't possibly plan their lives the same way that their parents or grandparents did. Just one last example that I'll give you is,
please.
I have these friends who are 10 years older, right, than me. And most of them, when I see their wealth is from real estate. And, these are urban people that had the money to invest into real estate, and they ended up making a lot of money out of that, right? Nobody will be able to make that kind of wealth by being in real estate anymore. Okay. Yeah. And this is not something that even if you don't teach people as an advisor, I think young people pretty much understand that. I have a home in Mumbai, I have a home in the hills, and my kids are always telling me that, either Bombay will get flooded or the hills will collapse and I'll have no home by the time, while even I live, forget about them. So they have very little interest in that asset as a source of wealth. And they look for other things that will give them that same pleasure or that same happiness. And I think we have to take that, we have to understand that, and we have to make the effort to find the right products and solutions that fulfill the aspiration of these generations of people.
Sure. Last couple of years, 18 months, time just flies by. But given the nature of the pandemic, what is the conversation men and women, spouses, partners, parents, I don't know, should have among themselves around money?
It's kind of sad also, but it has brought attention to some very fundamental things that people just took for granted and kept running around doing other things, so things that filled our lives were probably things that were not as meaningful as things that we did not pay attention to. And I think that realization has hit people very hard. Just, it's been forced on people. So relationships is become a very big thing to focus on. Money has become a big thing to focus on because almost everyone knows somebody who passed away without, taking care of their finances. And the grief that the other day somebody was telling me about this young person who ran wealthy person, but ran 10, 12 lakh bill on their credit card. Even though the parent passed away, was very wealthy, but the transfer of that money and this credit card devolving and raising 40% interest rate and things like that. So there are many, many stories like that, and this is a big one, but even in small ways, I think people have faced this mortality and understood that money is an important part of your life and your legacy. So people do want to understand. I think one of the things that's very important is for people to plan for them not being there. And that's one very obvious one. A lot of women realize that when they inherit, when they are in this position to sadly inherit the family finances, they're not ready for it. We know personally so many women that we have gone around and helped them to understand, what nominations they have or what they should be checking for, what documents, etc. So they just realize that and now they have the money, and now they don't know what to do with that money. And so I think it has brought attention to things like this, but in a more philosophical way. I think to young people, as I said, they don't take it for granted that they will have jobs for 30 years. I think they also don't take anymore for granted that they will live in a place where they have been living, right? So many of them left their homes in the cities and went to start working from their parents' home or from other places. And they realized that it works because we had never challenged that stereotype. I went to Mukteshwar. I started working from there. I found it very convenient. My internet works a lot better there. My house is more suited for, my house is much better suited for, both of us working because we don't hear each other, whereas in Mumbai we do. So I think people have in a more conscious way started to prioritize, think about their wealth and or money and what to do with it. A lot of people actually also manage to spend time on listening to podcasts, or I'm sure you saw that as well, right? And actually even on Twitter Spaces and places like that, because in the evenings now everybody is not sitting in a pub and a cafe and having a drink. So they listen to these things and simple things like, the benefits of compounding or staying invested, and equity markets boomed. So I think that also brought attention to this whole idea of understanding money and what it could do for you. And I think the idea that your own money could liberate you from the drudgery of having to listen to somebody or wake up every morning to do something, I think that's another thing which I should say has had a multiplier force effect compared to earlier. And all of these are pretty significant changes actually for people to think about. They change their levers to money management. I think it is for people like you and me and us to match that from the supply side. But I think on the demand side, things have changed and will change.
Good to know that. So now let's get into a slightly more hairier, on kind of winding down the episode and all the heavy lifting is done. I want to talk about something totally different, right? I mean, women and startups. What is the deal, right? At the risk of sounding extremely naive, I'm a man after all. Why aren't there 10 times more women founders? Okay, you mentioned, I think I read an interview recently where you said that women don't scale their businesses because of a vicious circle. Tell us more.
Yeah, so it's like you don't see women on the roads, right? You don't see women driving. You don't see so very, very basic things. You don't see them doing startups because it is hard to get funding. It is harder to get debt. It is much more effort. So first of all, you have to put in a certain amount of personal conviction, which everybody has to, man or woman. When you decide on a startup journey, you have that extra sort of commitment to saying this is a cause that I'm passionate about and I care about enough to live with it, breathe it, and make it happen at any cost. And there will be failures, there will be all of that. That is across gender. But I think with women, what ends up happening, with men, what ends up happening is that there's a bit of a support system also around. So very few people will pull you down. And I used to, when I was in Paytm, I used to call it the mother-in-law effect. There will be mothers-in-law who will tell you who used to, now even that has gone, who would say the IIM se padh ke kyun startup mein naukri karne ja rahe ho type of thing, because but that's not even that is not true anymore. Now people actually value that somebody works in a startup because there are enough and more demonstration effect of the kind of wealth people have created or the kind of prominence people have got or the voice that they have in the ecosystem. So I think people value that. And to men, it is a lot easier to plug into that ecosystem, to find those 5 or 6 or 7 people who pat you on the back and who will say, I have your back. Chalo, kuch to hoga, dekh lenge kya hoga. So, you jump into that. It's like going out in the evening, you will have your buddies, you will go out and you will see how even if you will get drunk, somebody will bring you home. If you're a girl, you don't just have to think about getting drunk and somebody will bring you home. You have to think about just surviving that evening, right? So you have to think in your head, there are a lot of different noises already because of your conditioning, because of all the difficulties. And then the external voices don't help either. So nobody really tells you, acha chalo, we'll see how whatever happens, we'll pull you back and we'll support you. You actually, on the other hand, you're constantly justifying. You're constantly saying, yeah, I'll understand. And yeah, I know my maths is not very good, but I'll hire an accountant and I'll understand. Or I will try and, do something. And really, it's not even important for you to know everything before you do anything, because as you will do, you will grow, you will learn. And I think people know that and understand that. but it's not as, it doesn't come as easily. That support system doesn't come as easily to money. So apart from the fact that raising money, proving your idea, making that proof of concept are all not as easy, there is also this supportive ecosystem, which is not, I won't say that it's totally missing. It's a lot better than before. Things are definitely getting better, but it's not as easy. So I'm actually happy that there are at least as many women as there are who are doing things. So I am. And the other thing that I have to tell you, Anupam, is that it's not even that small a number of women that are building. It's just that when it comes to giving prominence to them, they don't get that level of prominence also. So I think there's a lot more documentation and noise of around the men who are building than around the women who are building. So I'm actually personally on a couple of WhatsApp groups where there are women founders, where there are these other women, and there are very impressive women doing very impressive things, but they just not as much in the media. There's not as much of splash around them as it happens every time there is like a little bit of a fundraise by a set of 3 guys from IIT, and all of that is good. I'm not against it,
I get that, yeah.
But I'm just saying that you won't see as much. So why not more women? Of course, there will be more women. They are already getting there. The fun thing is that the younger women that we talk to. So as a part of Salt Story, we talk to a lot of the younger women because that's our primary TAM, and they don't think like the older women. They are very, very focused about what they want to do, and I think they will challenge and they will break through, and people like us will support them. We will be there to have their back.
Always here, yeah. I mean, this is an invite to any women, who's out there and who wants to do an episode out here. Please, if you think that my podcast can help you reach out to more people, please reach out to me. And Shinjini, this is an invite to all your co-founders, or in fact any employees also. Please, Paisa Vaisa is, just think of it as, as, I won't call it your home, but you know what I'm talking about. You're always welcome out there. There'll always be place for you here.
And you will enjoy the conversation. You have to hear Chaitra's story and Aditi's story. Very, very different. All 3 of us come with very different stories, different attitudes. And it's been amazing to, sort of partner with them to start on this journey.
Yeah, always happy to have them over. So, in fact, let's talk about that, right? My last and final question, what should we look forward to at Salt? Listeners out there who probably haven't heard of Salt and they're going and checking out your website right now, salt.one, they're checking out the app, your Insta accounts. What do they look forward? I mean, what can they look forward for? And do you have any message for our listeners?
Sure. So my message for your listeners is to go and take the money personality test. The link is everywhere. It's on our @my Salt app, the Insta handle. It's on my personal, handle on both Twitter and Insta. And it's so one good thing is that you get started with your journey of not just understanding your journey with money, but it also helps us as people who are building for the generation that will think about money as more integral to their lives. So it helps us to get very good insights about you, so that what we build is useful to you. So Anupam, while we are waiting for our regulatory licenses to launch the platform, what we are doing is that we are releasing products that are non-regulated products that are more in the behavioral space. And as I told you earlier, we don't believe in education. We don't believe in talking down to people, because we just think that's not really even important. When you do something, you learn. The best way to learn something is by doing something. Every time I'm on one of these Twitter spaces, etc., about investing, I find that guys who ask questions are typically they can be from Jodhpur, and they would have just started investing at 19, and you find very few girls of that cohort. So our idea is to build these cohorts of people that actually do things, that learn things. So according to that, keeping that in mind, we will be releasing 2-3 behavioral type of products. One of them is just due to be released probably in another 15 days to a trial group, and then eventually to be scaled. It's very exciting. It's a little bit of you can call it a journal, but it's a bit more than a journal. You will have to see it to kind of understand exactly what it is. And the other thing that we are also building is in the space of understanding your financial investing journey in particular. But again, that's about a month away. So you will see these behavioral products that are more high frequency, high engagement, because they help us to sort of build the eventual product best. But when the platform is ready, you'll see investing, you'll see insurance, you'll see even credit products. We will keep adding one by one. But that's the idea is for women to be able to find what is relevant to them at their stage in life. But our initial TAM is the millennial, Gen Z young women and men if they want to. We're not blocking them, but we are designing for women. So the idea is that it's for them, for the freelancer, the content creator, the women who otherwise don't find the time to sit and engage with a relationship manager and do something. You can come here and you can do something quickly. And in the process of doing that, you learn stuff. So that's what you can look forward to.
Yeah, I completely look forward to that. And I wish you and Salt, the entire team at Salt, all the very best. Hope to have you back very soon on our podcast. And folks, that's it. That is a wrap on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Shinjini Kumar, co-founder, Salt. Shinjini, thank you. Yeah, this has gone on for almost an hour, but I had a lot of fun doing this. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
Thank you so much, Anupam, for inviting me. It's been such a pleasure.
And listeners, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm your host, Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter. And thank you so much for listening to Paisa Vaisa.
No material on the show should be considered as financial advice. The material on the show is for informational purposes only. Please consult a financial advisor before taking any investment decision.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita talk to Shefali Bhatt. She's the tech and culture reporter from The Mint. She gives her views on meme culture, the creator economy, and other internet trends. Check out our new podcast on parenting, Big Talk About Tiny Humans. In the first episode, hosts Devi Shobha and Meghna stress on the importance of eating together as a family. What are the current trends amongst global investors? Viraj Nanda, co-founder of Globalize, tells Anupam all about it on Paisa Vaisa. The Simplified Gang decode all the groundbreaking things that NASA's new James Webb Telescope can do. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk discuss the recent Quad Summit that PM Modi was a part of. And on the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik asks Devaya Bopanna about starting India's first DAO. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. And also remember, you can check out a lot of our stuff on YouTube. Go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube and you'll get a list of all the various channels that we do have. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda and CoinSwitch Kuber. Thank you so much for making this possible.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.